And we are live. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Lunch and Learn. Whee! Give the camera a wave, guys, because whatever you can see on the screen there, that's what everyone can see. That, to the thousands watching on Facebook and the millions watching on YouTube, welcome, and we hope you enjoy the show. So, Lunch and Learn, fellas and gals. We are going to talk for about 33 and a half seconds about Parshat Pekudei. And then we will dive back into Pirkei Avot, where we have been talking about that really long list. And if we ever want to get through that really long list, we have to allocate more time. We have to allocate more time to Pirkei Avot than we do to the parasha. So let's just sum up 33 and a half seconds about this week's parasha, the last parasha in the book of Shemot. And we are finally going to build the Mishkan. So that's essentially what happens. They put everything together. They get together the uniform of the Kohen Gadol. They set up the Mishkan, and very interestingly, as you'll see if you read my Devar Torah in the newsletter this week, the Midrash tells us that it was miraculously put up by Moshe, and it required very little human exertion. It just needed a little bit of effort, and then miracles happened that things went where they needed to be. I don't know if any of you remember the scene in Mary Poppins where she clicks her fingers and the room starts to tidy up, and everything starts flying back into the drawers and all that kind of thing. So that's kind of the picture that I have in mind, where Moshe just kind of goes like this, and the Mishkan, the panels, the pillars, the beams, the curtains, everything just kind of miraculously falls into place. But where do you think they all get these ideas from anyway? I always say that if you go through some of these deep sources and the mystical sources, you see the Midrash and you see Kabbalah, that's where they get all of the material for all the Marvel films anyway. You want to know where the superheroes come from? They come from the Torah. Anyway, so Chazak, Chazak, Vanit, Chazek. That is a short word on Parshat Pekudei. So we can take comments and questions before we dive in. But otherwise, we're going to launch back into Pirkei Avot. If you're following inside a green Siddur, you will find this particular Mishnah on page 567, where we are doing chapter 6, Mishnah 6. And if you recall, Mishnah 6 was a very, very long Mishnah, and it was talking about the kind of 48 prerequisites. You couldn't find it. Well, hopefully you can find it now and keep up. So we were talking about the types of attitudes and the focuses and the priorities that will help us be able to study Torah, be able to form a healthy Torah-based outlook and philosophy on the world. And you're seeing it in the Hebrew there on the screen, but let's just scroll down. So we talked last week about the actual need to study, the need to actively listen, the need to verbalize what you learn, to understand what you learn, to have an appropriate level of awe and respect for the Torah, and humility, to realize that we're not the be-all and end-all, to realize that we're not at the top of the chain, so to speak, and that there's always room to learn and there's always room to grow. So we pick it up this week with number 9. You can't achieve anything in Torah without Mrs. Alinek. That is number 9. You can't get there without joy. Without Mrs. Alinek. You can't get there without joy. You can't get there without joy. It says it on the page. You will never be accomplished in your Torah wisdom unless you've got joy. So there we go, guys. By dint of the fact that she's in the room, we're already on the right step. So what do we mean when we say joy? That we're supposed to approach our Torah learning with joy, with an element of happiness, with an element of simcha. By the way, today is Rosh Chodesh, so Chodesh Tov to you all. We're entering into the month of Adar Sheni. It's going to be Purim in a couple of weeks' time. So if you haven't yet booked for any of the Purim stuff, make sure you do so. That's the plug. But we say, Mishanichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha, that when the month of Adar starts, you should increase your happiness. You should increase your joy. So Joy, everyone's going to come and queue up outside your house for the next month. It has been. So we've had the first Adar. Now we're in the second one. That's right. I don't think it's as precise as that. I can't. It's whenever my phone tells me that there's a leap year. That's it's.
My stepfather both died in Adar, the 12th and 13th of Adar Sheni.
Oh, I see.
So when.
So you'll have your. So when.
Yeah, but you're yeah.
Yeah.
And so I never know quite when it comes round because apparently you have to observe the Yorkshire on ordinary Adar 1 because you haven't got till 2 comes round. They actually died.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, we wish you long life anyway. So Misha Nichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. There is a realization, there is a spiritual effect that we are, as we enter into this month, it's a month of joy, it's a month of happiness, and we should find ways of injecting happiness into our lives. But what do we mean when we say that we learn Torah b'simcha, learn Torah with joy? So part of that might mean that you got to do what you love, and if there are parts of Torah wisdom that speak to you more so than others, then you should channel yourself in those directions, because that way you'll actually enjoy what you're learning. There is an element of it is possible to enjoy Torah study. It is possible. Not everyone appreciates that, and people can sometimes be a bit afraid or intimidated to get their toes wet, because they think, oh, well, it's boring. It's what the academics, it's what the rabbis do. It's what people that don't look after themselves in a physical sense do. I don't want to go to some wrecked old building in the middle of Jerusalem. That doesn't speak to me. But that doesn't speak to everybody. But there will be things in our Jewish resources that do speak to us. And so find the things that you identify with, find the things that you resonate with. Those are the things that you enjoy. So go for it. Knock yourself out. There's also something important to realize, that in terms of an emotional connection to the Torah that we study, every single year we have a day in the calendar where we are supposed to appreciate the joy of what it means to have the Torah in our lives. Every year at the end of Sukkot, we have Simchat Torah, and we dance with the Torah, and we hold the Torah, and we kiss the Torah, and we celebrate, and we rejoice. And what that should tell us then is that if we don't feel joy when we are thinking about or associating ourselves with the Torah, then there could be something missing. There could be something missing. If Simchat Torah is a boring day, if the rabbi's sermon is the last thing on your mind, if lunch and learn is something that you could never dream of attending, then there's something wrong with you, quite frankly. No. So that is learning Torah with joy. Number 10, learning Torah with Tahara, with purity. Quiet, please. Stop enjoying yourselves, guys. Anyway, so learning Tahara, learning in purity. So this could mean many, many different things.
What's serving the wine? Humility, joy, and serving the wine of joy.
Really?
Yes. Oh. You're saying something.
Well, that's just wrong.
Yeah, some books are different on that.
In the Hebrew, the next word after besimcha is betahara. And tahara means to learn in purity. Pardon me?
It's not
Shimush Chachamim. Shimush Chachamim. That's the next one after Simcha?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, says Chief Rabbi Sachs, one does not need to learn the Torah in Tahara. I don't know where it's gone. So, what does it mean? That's an excellent question. So, there are different things that one could think about when we say impurity, right? So, one of the levels of understanding is that since the Torah is pure, so it has to be learnt and studied in a pure environment. So we don't take the Torah into the toilet, for example. We don't disrespect the Torah in that way. We don't take it into a dirty or an impure environment. There's a relatively famous halacha, Jewish law, that if you go to a cemetery and you are a person who usually wears their sit out of their shirt, when you're in a cemetery, you should tuck your sit in, because the actually this is not relevant at all. But anyway, Gary's like, what's that got to do with the price of fish? Anyway, but why is that? It's because after a person leaves this world, they can no longer do mitzvot, and you're kind of like just rubbing it in their faces. But in my head, I went there because when you are near to a dead body, there is a perimeter of tum'ah, of impurity that surrounds a burial place. But it doesn't really have anything to do with learning Torah but Tahara. So I don't really know why I went there. But in my head, it seems slightly relevant. Tahara, yes. That's called the purification process. That's right.
There's all these impurity laws in marriage as well.
That's right. That's right. So that is a good example. That is a good example because in the bedroom, when a husband and wife are intimate, you shouldn't have holy books and holy items on display. So that is a good example.
When I got married, I still got it.
No.
It was a very religious Orthodox synagogue when I got married. It was a full booklet on impurity. What should do. What should do.
So that is a good example, actually. Yeah. I don't know why I should be so surprised that Rita's come up with a good example. That's almost offensive. So I think one of the key things here is that somebody who is studying the Torah, somebody who is teaching the Torah, should be coming from, setting a good example and setting the tone. We often talk about, these jokes about how you see the professor who's not leading by example, and they say something like, do as I do, don't do as I say, don't do as I do. Practice what you preach, all these different cliches and all these different jokes that we're aware of. There is something quite significant about this. That it's a serious matter and a serious tone and a serious framework that is important to consider. There would be rabbis who, before they would teach any class, they would always go to the mikveh beforehand, and they would immerse themselves. And it's not just because of needing to take a shower. It was the mindset. When you are appreciating the role that you play in sharing words of Torah and the wisdom of God, it's something that you'll take very, very seriously. And
in Israel, my son, when he got married, he went to the mikveh as well.
Yeah.
My son, I'm talking.
So it really kind of comes back to this piece about if you want this wisdom to permeate and to penetrate and to and to be accepted, right? Then there is an idea that the person transmitting the material also has to be coming from the right place. I've said this phrase before: "Devarim hayotzim min halev nichnasim el halev," that the words that come from the heart will permeate and penetrate into somebody else's heart. People can see through when when there's a huge discrepancy between the words that people are saying, the ideas that people are sharing, and the life that they are living. If you feel like the person is insincere and is not genuine and is not honest and is not, setting their own bar at a reasonable height, then how would you ever expect for that person to feel like they could learn from that teacher? So when it comes to other disciplines, perhaps this isn't usually a focus, and what goes on behind closed doors and what people get up to in their own spare time would not necessarily impact on their ability to teach, and it wouldn't necessarily impact on their ability to study those topics. But there's a bit of a high bar when it comes to Torah studying. So that's how I see studying Torah in a state of purity, in a pure environment, with a pure mindset, setting the example, setting the tone, having the consistency of character on the outside just as much as on the inside. So I think that's all part.
Is that why you lay, when you wash your hands before you, do anything?
Yeah.
Before you eat, before you wash something?
That's all part of the purification process as well. That's right. There will be people who go to the mikveh every single morning before they go to pray. But one day when we've got a mikveh in Bushi, then we can think about that. But yeah, there will be. It's really only the men that will do this. The women will only go to the mikveh when they complete their cycles. But there will be men who go to the mikveh every single day before they pray. And that sets them up for. No, we've got a ladies' mikveh in Bournemouth. We've got a ladies' mikveh in Edgware. There's a ladies' mikveh in Kingsbury. There's a men's mikveh in Edgware. There's a men's mikveh in Golders Green. There's.
It's awful we haven't got one.
It is awful, Joy. I couldn't agree with you more. Please, God, it's coming. Well, we've got the bucket outside to do the pots and the pans.
At United Synagogue, we bought 100 all new dishes and things. There's something going on, and we had to take them all.
Yep.
And it was filthy.
Yes.
It was.
It's ironic. It's really ironic.
How are we going to put these plates in that filthy? A big sort of like a well.
Yep.
And it looked like green and horrible. And I thought, this is ridiculous.
Well, maybe after you've had your lunch rather than before, go and lift the lid on the one outside. And oh, has it? Thank you, Gary. Historically, that hasn't always been the case. But isn't that amazing? The fact that when we talk about this, I'll come to you in a second then, Paul. When we talk about this, we're not saying that it's clean water, just that it's pure water. And that's an important. It's it's hard to get our heads around it. By the way, just for the avoidance of any doubt, and especially because there will be millions watching on Zoom and YouTube and Facebook, but the women's mikvaot especially, and a lot of the men's mikvaot now as well, they're practically like spas. They're not dirty. They're not, they are. First of all, they'll be cleaned regularly, but second of all, they are decorated in a way that is much more appealing and much more exciting to go to a mikveh. And so, if we've got pictures in our minds of caves and wells and freezing cold water and dirt and all that, beard hair and all that, all that kind of thing, all gone. All gone.
I went with Zara to Golders Green when she got married.
It's beautiful.
Very lovely.
Yeah.
The one in Bournemouth. Yes.
No. Well, if you know that Paul's got a question, then no, I refuse to take it, Morris. I'm sorry. Paul, over to you.
I actually find that what we've got in front of us is extremely inspiring. It's beautiful, beautifully written, very inspiring. But there's one bit that jumps out at me and says that although everything in here is inspiring, there's one bit that I just have this huge problem with, which is that someone who studies Torah has acceptance of suffering.
And I promise you we'll get there, Paul. I promise you we'll get there. But we are going to go through it systematically. And so I've prepared notes for all of them up until that one. So it won't be this week, whatever happens. But if we're quick, then we might get up to, that one comes in at number 26. So we're on 10 at the moment. So we will get there, Paul. I do guarantee it. The irony will be is that you'll miss that week, and it'll be the most amazing class ever, and you won't be there to watch it. But we'll get there. I don't know why you seem to have frozen.
Is there significance in the numbers?
Oh, yeah.
Is there a significance in the order of them? I'm not sure. I don't know. I mean, I think there's probably a logic to the system. I think are you still there, Paul? Have we frozen or is he frozen? Well, that's a lovely face to behold. I think it's him. Dad, thumbs up if you can still hear us. Oh, it's no proof. My dad might have gone for his lunch, so it's no proof. Fantastic. Okay. Oh, Morris, over to you.
That's all right. I didn't mind your taking the question because we're talking about choice. That's all right. It's probably a ridiculous question, but when you total the tax, is it separate for medium milky?
No, it can all go in.
It can all go in.
Yeah, because you're usually doing this. Exactly. They haven't been designated. They haven't been used yet. Yeah. And the water is cold. Is that a question or a statement? Bit of both. The water's usually cold. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. For the body, yeah. For the pots, they don't usually waste the money on it. Yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Well, it might just make the mikveh dirty, but it wouldn't necessarily purify them if they've been used.
In the Federation one in Israel, they've got a heater in the
Well, baby steps here. Let's just make sure we get a ladies' mikveh in Bushy as soon as possible. Okay. Welcome back, Paul.
Is it once or is it 3 times?
Different people do different things. I was always told once. And only for things made out of glass and metal, and then there's all the questions about electrical items that, if you've got those questions, you need to ask. But things made out of wood, things made out of stone, things made out of plastic, they don't need.
You wouldn't immerse electrical items.
Well, Michelle, let's not go there. Number 11.
Just make sure you don't have it plugged in.
Yeah.
Electrical items.
Number 11. Shimush Chachamim. Ministering to the sages. What does it say on the screen here? It says attending to the sages, serving the wise. Yeah. Okay, so for this one, this is quite interesting as well. This is the element, as it were, of not just kind of treating Torah wisdom as a text, and that's the end of it, but actually the importance of the immersive experience as well. Before we had everything written down in books, you would imbibe your Judaism just through osmosis. Is that the right word? Imbibe, right? You would learn how to live as a Jew. Oh, David Drews, hello. You would learn how to live as a Jew just by being around Jews and just by being around your parents at home. So many people learned how to have a kosher kitchen just by observing their parents keeping a kosher kitchen. So many people learned how to do Shabbat just by observing their families keep Shabbat. So I think that's an important dimension and an important element to it. But this says specifically attending to the sages, attending to the rabbis, attending to the teachers. And so perhaps here we see that if you're going for these immersive experiences, you're bound to get the best experience with, not the VIPs. I'm not saying I'm a VIP, but if people really know what they are doing, then you will learn from their ways, not just in terms of Jewish law, but also in terms of how to treat people as well, assuming that these are well-behaved sages and well-behaved teachers and well-behaved rabbis. There will be something that will be transmitted just by spending time in their company, and shadowing them. And I mean, I've seen this myself just within my own life and also within my own rabbinate, that I could go to a class on how to officiate at a funeral, but actually just following Rabbi Feldman around for an hour got what I needed. So so when you actually see these things in action, it will leave an imprint that goes beyond just sitting and reading something. So that's another dimension. Again, what we're trying to understand are the different ways in which we get a well-rounded and fully absorbed mindset and outlook on the Torah life. Number 12, dikduk chaverim, closeness with colleagues, critical give and take with friends. Not sure how it translates it in your green books there. Pardon me? Debate with students. Yeah. So just keep your fingers on the place around, or just like get pencils and tick them along as you go. So
There are two, isn't it? There are association with colleagues.
Yep.
And debate with students.
Yeah, that's right. So so we're going to do both of those. Yeah. So part of this is having the right friends, having the right people around us that are going to make us better people and not, God forbid, drag us down. There's a piece here about how you can't just necessarily achieve everything and do everything as an individual. There are even mitzvot that you can't do without another person. Be fruitful and multiply is one that sprung to mind straight away. Right? That takes two to tango. Saying Kaddish, yeah. So there are different things that one can't do unless they have people around them. There's also another idea here. If you recall the story of Jacob and Esau, Yaakov and Esav, so we are taught that before they were born, anytime their mother would pass by a holy place, call it a shul for argument's sake, or a study hall, so Yaakov would be trying to break free. And any time that she would walk past a place of idol worship, Esav would be trying to break free, right? Are we familiar with this story? We're familiar with this episode. So the question would be asked, okay, based on the wisdom that we receive from the Talmud, from the Gemara, a child inside their mother's womb is being taught Torah by an angel. All right, I don't know if we're familiar with this. All right, so the Gemara teaches us that a child, while they are developing in the womb, is actually receiving wisdom and receiving Torah from an angel. And then just before the baby is born, the Gemara says the angel taps them over here, and all that wisdom goes, and then they spend their life trying to relearn that wisdom, which means you were taught that.
That's why he didn't go.
He went there instead of there.
That's why
Okay. So I was taught here, and for those of you who remember the Abbey National advert, filtering. We call this the filtering. So what was I saying? So what that means is that for all of us, we were extremely proficient in Torah before we were born. And then it's not so much that we are learning new ground, we're actually revisiting and we're actually reintegrating into ourselves wisdom that we've actually already been given before, which is quite a powerful idea. Okay, so let me get there. So thank you for keeping me back on track. So the question is this: if Yaakov is busy learning Torah in the womb, why is he trying to get out when he goes past a Torah hall? He's literally learning right now. So one of the answers that's given is because it's not meaningless, but it's not the same if you're having to learn your Torah in the proximity of a bad colleague or a bad study partner or a bad influence. Still an Esau. This is all esoterical, metaphorical. Some people even tell it as a joke, David. But it's just that idea of we have a phrase in the Gemara, which I can't remember. Woe to the evil person, woe to his neighbor. This idea that the people that we have around us, if we've got toxic individuals, if we've got bad classmates or bad colleagues or whatever it is, disruptive influences, it's going to impede on a person's progress. It's going to impede on their ability to study and to learn and to develop and to grow. So that's all part of it. Did someone have a Joy?
The teaching in the womb, does that apply to female?
Yeah, I see. I wasn't there, but
You're being taught before you're born.
being taught before.
They're already predicted to good or evil before they're born.
Pardon me?
So the soul has a leaning towards whatever it's taught, the bad and the good.
Could well be. Yeah, could well be. And by the way, there have been stories. Obviously, we've never had them on camera or anything like that. But as the saying goes, not every story is true, but there's truth to every story. But there have been stories that have filtered through of children who have been born without their philtrum, and they've apparently been able to, as they started to learn to speak, they could only speak in Hebrew, and they would be fluent in biblical verses, and these are stories that have found their way through. Although I have never managed to corroborate any of these stories, it's still quite interesting nonetheless.
They're twins, so it might be you're just saying that every person, it's like a metaphor, every person has good and evil in them.
Well, don't read too much into the Yaakov and Esav thing, but it's just more the point that having the right people around you is also going to be a part of a person's direction in life. Number 13 then, Pilpul Hatalmidim, sharp discussion with students. What does it say here? Where on earth has this gone? Debate with students and sharp discussion. Okay, so in here we see a very important nugget as well. I mean, all of these are important. I should probably stop prefacing by in here we see another important message. But the debate, the ability to bounce ideas off, the ability to challenge each other, that all helps refine a person's understanding. If you have to defend your position, if you have to explain why you think the way that you do, if you have to express why things are important to you, that will help consolidate those things in your mind. As a small example, if you're sitting amongst friends and they say to you, like, why do you keep Shabbat anyway? Why do you go to lunch and learn on a Thursday? Why do you keep this? Why do you do that? Don't you think this is all a bit weird? Don't you think it's all a little bit ancient, a little bit antiquated? If you have to defend why something is important to you, then that will in turn have an effect, and it will strengthen your position. So that exists in that kind of area, but it exists in the way that one would study Torah as well. The atmosphere in a Beit Midrash, the atmosphere in a study hall is not like a library. It's not quiet. It's not everyone independently, quietly getting on with what they need to do. If you walk into a bustling Beit Midrash, everyone's shouting at each other, they're yelling at each other like their lives depend on it. And that's got a name for it, actually. It's called in our sources, it's called the Milchamta Shel Torah. It's called the war of Torah, the battle for truth, the battle for authenticity. And so you get very fiery discussions because people are wanting to understand and they're wanting to get to the truth. So that's all part of the framework for Torah study and developing a healthy, robust outlook on life. And it sharpens the mind. And, teachers will often say, and it's brought down in our sources as well, that you learn a lot, but you learn the most from your students. So, you also have to have the readiness to be receptive to challenge, and to be open to discussion and open to discourse and open to debate. But if one does so, then it sharpens your own viewpoint. And it also means that creativity can come to the forefront, because if you are discussing with other people and looking at things from new angles, that's how new ideas can come about. So, we're not afraid of creativity in Judaism, but it has to be done in the right way and in a respectful way as well. Next, we move on to number 14, Yishuv, which we translate as deliberation.
We've got serenity.
Serenity, yeah, because Yishuv Hadat is kind of like peace of mind, a settled mind. So in here we might think about concentration and focus and being able to sit with what you are studying and not feel like you're flitting from one thing to the other. It's very difficult for one to study. It's very difficult for one to think if they are surrounded by distractions. This is why a lot of yeshivas will have policies of no phones in the Beit Midrash, because how could you really, or no computers. So this is where we switch off, guys, because already we're breaking the rule. So that's a joke. Don't go anywhere. So if you've got a lot of distractions, then you won't be able to concentrate. And before I come on to my next point, I'll go to Rita on line 1.
I'm looking at all this and I'm listening, and it's quite interesting. This 48 virtue, is that a summary of the 5 books we have learned? Is this really like a
So it's interesting because we will notice a lot of the themes that we've talked about
which is
re-emerging. So it's not billed as a summary. It just happens to be that the 48 things that we're now condensing into a helpful digest, into a helpful list, will be the types of ideas that we have seen throughout the other chapters. By the way, I forgot to mention, I mentioned this book last week. There's a whole book just on these 48 things that we're seeing. So yeah, you're welcome to check that out. I've never been through it myself. I read the first 3 chapters, hoping to get through all 48 before we reach this Mishnah, and I didn't. Okay, so where are we up to? Deliberation, yishuv, focus, concentration, and another element to this is being able to process, being able to analyze before answering, before paskening. My dad always used to say to me, always read the question. So that's part of yishuv as well, is not just to take in information, but to actually focus on what the information is and to think about it and to deliberate on it. So there's an element of always reading the question, but for a teacher, there's also always read the questioner, right? Because you can encounter situations, and this isn't just about teachers, but this is any time when we are called upon to be considerate and sensitive and to help people with what they might be going through. A person might ask a question, but really that is just shielding and cloaking deeper issues, right? The famous example of this is the person that went to visit a rabbi to ask if you are allowed to drink 4 cups of milk at the Seder instead of 4 cups of wine. He didn't have enough money to afford wine, can he do it on 4 cups of milk? So the rabbi went out and took out a sizable lump of cash to give to this individual. And the students that were there said, why did you give him so much money? That's way more than he needs to afford wine. And he said, because if he's asking me if he can make the bracha on milk, that means he doesn't have enough money even for meat. So I was giving him enough money so he could buy wine, and I was giving him enough money so that he could buy meat for his Yom Tov meal as well. And that's because you have to sometimes read between the lines of what people are asking. And that's all part of Yishuv. That's all part of focus, concentration, being attentive, being mindful. That's all part of it as well. Gary.
I just wondered, is there any connection between this word and the Israeli government before 1948? Seems in the words.
What was the word before 1948? I don't know. I'm not great on history, but you've got yeshuvim, you've got settlements, which is a word that we still use. So settling the land is yeshuv. Yeshiva are the academies where one goes to sit and to study. Lashevet in Hebrew is to sit down. So it's all any words with yashav, yeshiv, whatever it is, that will all be part of sitting, settling, and yeah, it's all connected to the same word. Okie dokie. Number 15, we are up to mikra, a knowledge of verses. And I don't know if it keeps the next one associated with it as well, but Mishnah, knowledge of Mishnah. So those are the next one or two. So within this, it's emphasizing that, before everything, we actually, the first one that we said, number one, first and foremost, we said last week, was Talmud, was actual study. So here we're already at number 15, 16 before it mentions it, but you need to have that exposure to the verses, to the bread and butter, to the foundational texts. So if you've got a basic foundation, a basic awareness, that opens the door for your study. Mikra, the verses will help you to understand what we're talking about at all. When someone talks about Shabbos and we're like, I've got no idea what that is. Tefillin, I wouldn't have a clue what you're talking about. So there will be basic foundations that can be built just by reading the text. And that's the same with Mishnah as well, is that the more exposure you have to the topics, the more you can actually feel like you can engage in the conversation and engage in the classes and engage in the lessons. Because if it's all completely alien, then it's very, very difficult. So these things open the door for people to be able to feel like they can learn and to feel like they can contribute and to feel like they can have a clue what's going on. So this is part of it as well. And by the way, maybe an opportunity to plug the fantastic mini series that we started last night with Penina Savory, who opened the door for many people with the Nach, with prophets and the writings. That video will go up on YouTube if you want to check it out. You can come along for part 2 next week. It's all on Zoom. So that helps open the door to Mikra, to the verses, to the Torah, to the Bible. Okay, it's only 12:49. Let's keep going. Any questions on Zoom? None yet. Paul's just waited with bated breath for us to get to the one that matters. Number 17. Very controversial. In fact, Rita, you might want to shield your ears for the next 6, is it? I think. So we're going to get to 6 areas where we are being told to limit our indulgence in these 6 different areas. So the first one is miut sechora, limited business activity. Miut derech eretz, which we translate as limited sexual activity. Miut ta'anug, which we translate as limited pleasure. Miut sheina, which we translate as limited sleep. Miut sicha, which we translate as limited conversation. And miut sechok, which we translate as limited laughter. So there you go. 6 limitations Who wants to attack me first before we get into it?
Impossible.
Impossible, says Rita. Impossible.
So, you know, they have to have business, so you've got to earn a living.
Yeah.
You've got to eat and keep your family. So you have to. It depends, you know, if you just want enough or if you want.
So that's an excellent point. That's the best place to start. Is we're not being told to abstain. We're not being told that we can't have these things in our lives. We're being told to limit how much emphasis we place on these things. We're being told or encouraged or taught, whatever word you want to use, we're being taught to curtail, to at least be mindful. I see all of these things as just to be aware of what role these things play in our lives, just to be mindful and to actually be in control as well. I think that's one of the big pieces as well, that it's about being in control of what these things mean to you in your life, and where you sit on the scale. How do we utilize them? How do we control them? Do they control us, or do I control them? Right? And that's how I see these 6 categories. We're not told that we can't have jobs. We're not told that we can't earn money. But how much time do we invest into it? How much do we pursue? And how much do we get addicted even to these different things? No one has on their stone when they leave this world, Frederick spent 18 hours a day working. No one has that on their stone at the end of it. And yet it's those things often that people devote their entire lives to, often at the expense of other important relationships. But what this is mentioning is that it's going to jeopardize the time you have available to allocate to Torah study, and to developing your mind and developing your Torah outlook on the world. So, you will have very highly successful business people who carve out time in their week, like yourselves, to attend a Torah class. That's all part of limiting. We're all making a decision now to limit our commerce by 1 hour a week, or 1 hour and 15 minutes, depending on how long he goes on for. Right? So that's part of limiting one's business activity. We make an active decision that we're going to carve out time for something other than commerce. There's a famous story about the Chafetz Chaim living in the early 1900s in Poland, and he needed to earn a crust, so he opened a shop. And because he was the Chafetz Chaim, a grocery store, because he was the Chafetz Chaim, everyone trusted him. And what he saw was everyone stopped shopping at the other fella, and they were coming over to him because they trusted him. So what did he do? He said, okay, I'm not going to open every day. I'll open a few days a week, and in that way, people will still go to the other guy. But what did they all do? They waited until his shop would be open so that they could go and shop. So that didn't change anything. So then he said, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll open just for a few hours a day. And that way people will still go shopping at his house, at his shop. What happened? They all waited for the shop to be open, and they all went to him still because he was the Chafetz Chaim. So eventually he just closed his business so as not to have detriment on this other grocer. But what he was also trying to teach is that business is not the be all and end all, and so it's about. Well, Ashley's watching, so careful what you say, Dave.
A lot of the big rabbis, the wives used to run the business, and they studied in college.
Still happens. You still have women who are the active breadwinners, as well as the active homemakers. Yeah. So yeah, women can sometimes be kept a bit too busy. Peter. Oh, you didn't have a question. You just wanted to say that Rita's an excellent wife. You just goes without saying. So the next one is Miut Derech Eretz, and that's interesting because from what I have here is limited sexual activity. What we have on the screen is minimum of Well, it's got it in a very funny order over here. Very, I can't.
You haven't got that in our book. In our
No, we got no sex in here, but
No sex in Rabbi Sachs' Siddur.
No, I can't see it.
Would have had to put it on the top shelf, I
It
guess.
said sleep there.
pleasure, sleep.
What's after business? Pleasure. Okay. So that's not a euphemism then, because the next one is pleasure. All right. So
Going back to
worldly matters. Okay. So derech eretz, right, which we say is kadma Torah, comes before. So we often talk about that as manners. Your derech eretz towards other people, we often say is manners. But it would seem that there's a couple of ways, but one of the key interpretations is that this is a euphemism for sexual activity. So derech eretz, in the sense that the words would mean the way of the world, and that's a euphemism, therefore, for one of the ways of the world, which is sexual activity. Rita.
going back into the impurity things, because the impurity laws are made the time you have your sexual activities, that's the time the woman is ready to
Right.
to
By the way, I just want to object to one thing that you said, because you call it the impurity, right? And it's not that there are times of the month where a woman is ritually impure, and that prevents them from being intimate. But our mindset towards that depth of the relationship shouldn't be that it is dirty, that is impure, that it's the holiest thing that we can do in our relationships. So I'm just keen for us to phrase that correctly. That it's not a taboo, it's not dirty, it's not to be discouraged. It's.
Is what it says on here? Is that what it says on here?
No, but I'm just realigning our focus a little bit, because you called it. We're getting back into that impurity thing. If anything, we're getting back into the purity. We're getting back into the holiness. It's not something that's taboo, but it is something that can create a lot of distractions. So that's perhaps why. There's the recommendation of channeling everything in the right direction and doing everything in an appropriate quantity, as well as quality. And if you have I would not encourage one to look around, but if you look at how sex crazed the world is, and what distractions that causes, and how it can damage people's ability to actually have proper relationships, we can start to understand why this might have made the list.
Actually, there was the first anniversary of that Sarah Everard, and it was all about this men seeking, sex, and the whole thing on it was thrown in on the television.
Yeah. Oh, it's on. Oh,
yeah. It's the first anniversary.
It always, not always. It often comes up in conversation. It raises a lot of questions. But again, this is all about taking active control of your life. And so, if one is mindful about their attitudes to these things, that will already be 10, 20, 30 steps above where the rest of society seems to be when it comes to this issue.
It's interesting that in Judaism we don't think sex is impure.
No.
But Christianity, you're born in sin. They think that is a sin. Sex is sin. That is their truth.
It's still a difficult conversation topic, but that's because in Judaism we're not trying to force it out of conversation because it's taboo. We're trying to just make sure that whatever we're talking about it in an age-appropriate and a respectful way. So you might see articles occasionally about the reaction from very frum schools to government requirements to teach sex education. So that's not going to be because we view sex as taboo. It's going to be because you have to be able to teach these things in an appropriate way. When you consider how public people's relationships are, in the sense that not just individuals in their relationships, but the fact that nothing is what's the word? Nothing is taboo. But films, media, this stuff is everywhere and it's on show, right? We don't buy into that. It's private. It's private, and it should be discussed discreetly. And the balance that we're trying to find in many of these instances and in many of these schools is, how do we have the conversations with children and anybody in a way that the significance of what we're talking about. And that's not the same as saying, oh, it's taboo, we can't go there, we can't talk. We do talk about it, and there's a whole section of Jewish law that talks about it, but it's supposed to be something that's to be done Tahara, something that's to be done in purity, and with reverence and with awe and with all of our other 48 things. So it's not something that we just kind of just chuck out there and parade for everyone to see and think about and all that kind of thing. Because
the world now with the children, this is all they see with the pornography and the stuff on the internet, and they're exposed to this. They look up all these things.
Yeah.
They're young, and that's what they think life is.
and it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And just to dispel any other illusions, because there will be TV shows that make it out like this stuff doesn't even get talked about with brides and with grooms before they get married. That's poppycock. It does get talked about, and if it doesn't get talked about, then they're not going to the right teachers. So, but again, the concerns are not that it's taboo. The concerns are, how does one approach it with a lot of these mindsets, with the awe, the reverence, the tahara, the respect, the dignity, and all the rest of it. All right, 102. I'm happy to keep going. Yeah, I'm happy to keep going. We are on to miut ta'anug, limited pleasure. So we are up to limited pleasure, and again, happiness, pleasure, all of these things.
Not sexual, is it?
This isn't necessarily specifically about sexual pleasure. No, this is about any pleasure. And again, we often come back to this point that life is about balance. Life is about moderation. Everything in moderation, even moderation in moderation. So we know that people can become obsessed with things. We know that people can become addicted to things. And so this is a point about finding your pleasure in the right places, and getting your priorities right in life. It's interesting that people will spend so many hours in the office, but then when asked what they enjoy, they will say spending time with their family, or spending time with friends, or going to the gym, or whatever it is. So life is all about the allocation of our priorities, and the way that we divide up our time and the things that we do. So that I believe is the critical takeaway point there, of being in control really of the things that we indulge in and not letting them control us. Miut sheina, we have limited sleep. Our time should also be managed. This doesn't mean that you should only have 5 hours of sleep a night, or 3 hours of sleep a night, or never go to sleep. If anything, Maimonides, the Rambam, says that you should have 8 hours of sleep a night. That's what he codifies in his book of Jewish law. So when we say limited sleep, it doesn't mean to have not enough sleep. It means to have just the right amount of sleep, and to be in control of, what the repercussions will be of lazy days, as it were. Sleeping in until the middle of the afternoon, right? It's I remember this as a kid, and it was a thing then, and it's probably a thing now. People being able to show off to their friends how long they slept for on a winter Shabbos. Oh, I got to bed at 7 o'clock and I didn't wake up till 3 in the afternoon. Have you broken Shabbos like that? No, you've not broken Shabbos like that. But have you missed out on the whole of Shabbos? Yeah, you missed out on the whole of Shabbos, especially if you're then proud of the fact that you were up till 2:00 that night, Saturday night, going out to the clubs or whatever it was. Or 2:00 would be, if only it was 2:00, But our time should also be managed. We should be in control of how we spend our time, and it's also a message here of not pushing things off, because I guess the implication, if you're not limiting your sleep, that means you're getting more sleep, and if you're getting more sleep, then you're pushing something off potentially that you would have done that day for the next day because you've gone to sleep. So there's a message there about not pushing things off till the next day. And also there's an idea here that if 1/3 of our day is spent in sleep, then 2/3 of our day should be spent appropriately. Again, the allocation of, to coin the economics phrase, the allocation of scarce resources to the infinite demands of the consumer. We have to allocate and prioritize things that are going to be good for us, and not things that will sidetrack us or detract us. Next one, miut sicha, limited conversation. So there's a couple of points here.
So I suppose if it adds more talk, you're more likely to do Lashon Hara.
So Lashon Hara, I think, is one of those key points. We may also remember something that we learnt in Pirkei Avot: say little and do much. The next one is laughter.
No, it says on the same line.
Yeah, okay.
Small talk or laughter.
Different editions. So you've got the element of say little and do much. You've also got the point, which I'm sure will resonate with a lot of people, that Punky, Shalom Aleichem. So you've got a point here. We all probably know this about how ineffective meetings can be. Nothing gets done at meetings. Nothing gets accomplished. We just talk and we talk and we talk. And that joke that I love: a camel is a horse designed by committee. Yeah. So a camel is a horse designed by committee. Yeah. So meetings are ineffective. Talk is cheap. Talk is often ineffective. Doing things much, much better. And when we look around at the world and the emphasis that is placed on talk shows and round-the-clock news, and the constant barrage of information and talking and opinions, and everyone's got an opinion, sometimes you have to also have yishuv, silence, think about it, and be in control of what we're digesting and talking about and listening to. That's all part of this. And then we'll finish off with this one: miut sachot, limited laughter. And again, we're not saying you can't have laughter. It's obviously good to laugh. It's therapeutic to laugh. It's therapeutic to lift someone's spirits. Laughter has a place. Humor has a place. But there's a big difference between humor and schok, which is what our mission is talking about. And that's talking about a light-hearted attitude, a skeptical attitude, a mocking attitude, a cynical attitude where nothing is taken seriously. So if nothing is taken seriously, then you can't ever, or you'll find it much harder to really develop and make conclusions and make meaningful decisions, and to have that level of control over things in your life. So that's really where we get to with laughter, with humor. These are all important things. The Talmud teaches us that rabbis would always start their classes with a joke, because it serves a function. It gets people into the mood. It lowers your defenses to be able to then absorb things. So we're not saying it doesn't have a place, but there's an impression that too much levity and too much mocking everything will have on you. It just so happens that one of the funniest shows out there is Mock the Week, right, on BBC. But you can see the residual effect that it will have on someone if they're constantly, there's all these TV shows. Have I Got News for You? And stand-up comedians, and it erodes people's ability to see and to be respectful of things that are out there in the world. If we're constantly slamming politicians and we're constantly joking about politicians and mocking them, and you can never really have any level of respect for them, and people do deserve our respect. But there's a culture and there's an attitude about mockery and lightheadedness that the Mishnah over here encourages us to think about it, to limit it, to control it and not have it control us. So we'll pause over there at number 23, and we'll pick it up again next week. And to all those watching on Facebook and YouTube, we wish you a wonderful and meaningful day. And to all of our lovely people watching on Zoom, do feel free to stick around and schmooze with us for a few minutes more.